Well, I am Anthony Grasso, assistant football strength coach, University of Connecticut. I'm here with JD Mehlhorn and JC Hull. I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. These are two friends of mine, or at least I would consider them friends. I'm not sure what they would consider me most of the time, but they are always there when I need them. Great dudes. Really, I've enjoyed learning from them. I was able to work with them when they were at UConn as well, and they've since moved on to take head roles. So I'll be interested to kind of see their feedback on some of the things that they've come across during this quarantine, how obviously working in the capacity they're working in now compared to some of the positions they've had prior. So yeah, we'll get into it. Let's start with JC. Get a little bit of feedback from JC. Tell us where you're at now and what you're doing, and then you can track back as far as you need to. You know, go back as far as high school or college, where this whole thing started for you, and tell the people what they need to know about JC.
All right. Well, as Anthony said, my name is JC Hull. I'm the head athletic performance coach for football at Lindenwood University. It's a small D2 school outside of St. Louis. I'm originally from Southwest Missouri. Started my journey, I guess you could say, at a small school in Kansas called Ottawa University. Played football there. I got a chance to do some student assisting coaching as well. Kind of at that time, I was venturing back and forth between whether I wanted to be a football coach or a strength coach. Always loved the weight room. Of course, I'd played football since I was younger. And between that and experience coaching high school right after I finished my undergrad, I kind of got enough input that I decided the weight room was what I wanted to gravitate towards, just from a standpoint of like the extra hours of breaking down film, recruiting, and all that kind of stuff. And I just always felt at home in the weight room. So luckily, my university had a great alumni and Coach Ron McKeefrey. I reached out to him. He was at Eastern Michigan at the time, so did an internship there. That summer, it led to another internship at the University of Missouri, where I got to work with Pat Ivy, B-Man, all that great crew that was there. They had a profound impact on my career so far, just from a staff perspective. That's without doubt the best staff that I've been a part of. After I got done there, went back to Eastern, graduate assistant, and then basically transferred from Eastern to Carolina, where I got a chance to work with House. And then thanks to the connections I built there, I met you guys up at UConn, worked there for 2 years before taking this position. So kind of been all over the country. I've been blessed to work with some really great coaches, and as I'll probably mention a ton of times throughout this little podcast, that I've been surrounded by great people, of which I've had a great opportunity to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. As you guys can see, that was a pretty extensive background. Obviously, some great resources and some great people there for sure. JD, want to let the people know about yourself?
Yeah, so I am currently the head strength and conditioning coach for Olympic sports at Georgia State University. So I basically oversee everything that's not football or men's basketball here at Georgia State. How I got into strength and conditioning, I started off playing sports like a lot of us did in high school. And actually starting in high school, I had some awesome strength coaches there that kind of invested in me and taught me a lot about training and how the body responds to training. So that was Bob Curry was our head strength coach at high school. And so I was pretty fortunate to have that at the high school level. And actually Sean Mishka would come in and train a small group of us from time to time in high school. And he was very educational about our training and trying to get us involved in learning about why we were doing what we were doing. So I kind of got the itch there. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know that was going to be the career path I chose. But I went on to play football at Bethel University. It's a small university just outside of Minneapolis. And there I had Rick Meyer as my strength coach. And Rick Meyer was also a football coach on the defensive side of the ball for us. So I basically spent all year with Coach Meyer for all 4 of my years. And so I learned a ton from him. He's kind of a guy that spent a lot of time investing in me and kind of mentoring me in strength and conditioning. And while I was at college, one of my high school jobs was going back and working, or one of my college jobs during the summer was going back to my high school and working as a strength coach. So I started to kind of get a feel for what that looked like. And then moving on into college, when I decided that I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach, I was able to intern at the University of Minnesota under Coach Dietz. So I worked a lot with him and his teams, kind of my first internship experience outside of some of the work that I had been doing. And then that led into my senior year at Bethel University, and Coach Meyer was running the entire show by himself. So when I said I wanted to intern with them, I had the opportunity to work with a number of teams and actually take over some of the programming and some of the implementation for a number of the teams. I mean, we're a small Division III university, so small on resources. And so I got the opportunity to work at Bethel there and get a lot of experience from Coach Meyer. I can't say enough good things about him. And we'll talk probably about it, but there's a lot of awesome strength coaches at small schools out there. The logo doesn't tell the full story all the time. So from there, I went to App State. I was a graduate assistant. Started off interning in the weight room and was a graduate assistant with the exercise science department, but moved my graduate assistantship over into strength and conditioning. And meanwhile, during my time at App, I interned back at Minnesota during the summer. And so that was kind of my second time around. And so when a full-time position opened up there, I was able to slide right into that position. And so I learned a ton in Minnesota from Coach Dietz. Obviously, Coach Sarah Wiley was our director there. She is awesome. And we just had a really good staff there. Through my times as an intern and then as a full-time coach, I met a lot of really good coaches. Our football staff there was outstanding. Some of those guys are high-level football guys currently. Dustin Perry, Shay Thompson, Coach Eric Klein, who eventually took me to UConn. So I got to meet a lot of really good people there. And there's a lot of people that I didn't even get a chance to mention that kind of influenced my career. But then from there, went to UConn with Coach Klein. Coach Klein went out to UConn, and it was an opportunity for me to get into football. Loved football, and so I spent a couple years at UConn with Coach Klein, and from there, made my way down to Georgia State, and it's been really good so far. So the long and short of it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Again, a lot of great strength coaches, listed there. And I think what's interesting is both of you guys have taken on some pretty significant roles as leaders of your organizations, right? You guys have staffs, you have people that you need to motivate. So if JC, flip it back to you, if you could kind of just list out how, or like usually, like, and I've said this in a few podcasts I've done so far, like we've all got these these drivers, right? These things that get us out of the bed in the morning, right? So what would those things be for you in the world of strength and conditioning, and how have you kind of approached taking on a new role? Obviously, Lindenwood presents its own particular problems. It presents its own particular situations in comparison to like maybe Lindenwood Division II versus other Division II schools. Maybe it's similar to some Division I schools in some ways, right? Like, give us a little bit of an insight about Lindenwood and then what you do to try to motivate yourself and your staff from a buy-in perspective.
I mean, I'll start out with saying I did reference Lindenwood as kind of a small D2 school. We are very blessed here to have support from our administration. If you actually look at our weight room, our equipment, everything that we have here in the facility, like other than probably UConn and Mizzou, we have just as much square footage or bigger, and both of those facilities had a second level. That's pretty well the only difference between this one and that. So from a university perspective, like I'm very blessed. Our administration is awesome about backing us. Once again, the football coach, that was a huge plus of coming here. He understands the importance of the weight room. So like you have a lot of good things working for you. You're outside of St. Louis, so we got a lot of really talented kids in the area, and we're kind of a hotbed as far as being right in the middle of the country. So from an outside of just weights and the X's and O's, that kind of technical side, like we got a lot of stuff going for us. As far as stuff that really drives me, my staff, and just trying to help them out as much as possible. One of the first things that kind of always look to is explaining why. And I want to understand their why as a staff, why they're here, what they're looking to get out of it, and just kind of diving into that personal component. A lot of the stuff that I view myself from a coach is along the lines of building relationships, whether that's with the other sport coaches, the ATs, the players, my other staff. I want to get to know them a little bit more. And I feel like when you have that a little bit more personal bond, then you can be a lot tighter, and just the support can be there a little bit better. So I look to basically build those different relationships. I mean, as far as motivation, you guys all know, like we're strength coaches. We're just a little bit different. I'd say that whether you're an intern, you're a full-time, you're a head guy, whatever it is, director of the whole department, like you're just clockwork's a little bit off. So there doesn't take a lot of motivation within the staff as far as actually carrying out the duties, just because everybody's here to make the athletes better. And I think that's one of the great things, once again, that like the three of us can attest to. And I'm going to say that most of the places that we've been at, the staffs, like that's the important part of it. We're here for the kids. We want to help them achieve their athletic goals. We're looking to make them better people. I mean, it's not only about the athletics. I mean, you got academics, creating great citizens, characters, all that kind of stuff, even more so in today's society. So as far as that, that's kind of the quick and dirty of it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great answer. And obviously you do get deep there, right? And there wasn't much that you mentioned in terms of trying to push across certain X's and O's from a strength and conditioning standpoint, right? It was really all about that connection that you're creating and that connectivity that you have with all the people that you work with. So JD, going back to you, obviously you're on the Olympic side, right? So you've taken on a role as a head strength and conditioning coach, right? And you've been in both worlds, right? The Olympic and the football side. And so when you got to Georgia State, what are some of the issues that you've come across or some things that you wanted to put into place, right? Like everybody kind of has in mind, I guess, when you take over something that I have a structure, I want to, maybe this is how I want to kind of introduce my athletes to the training process. Here's how I'd like to structure a staff, and here are the philosophies and the beliefs of that staff, right? Have you been able to do that so far? I know you're still pretty early on in that process, but talk to me a little bit about that thought process you had, like heading down there, unpacking your stuff and getting going, and where you're at now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think the first thing that it kind of starts with when you get to a new place, obviously you want to have an idea of things that are important to you. And the thing that was really important to me and why I got into strength and conditioning is, I want it to be student athlete centered. We're here to help our student athletes grow and help make our student athletes better. Obviously, in competition, but also, college is a great time where kids are growing into young men and young women, and it's an awesome developmental time. And so, I wanted to create a department where student athletes come first, and all of my coaches on my staff and all of the athletic department can know that we're marked by that. We are there to be there for our student athletes and support their growth and encourage and empower them to reach their full potential. And so, that's something that you have to talk about, and you have to figure out ways to be about and communicate that message across your staff, but then also to the student athletes and the coaches as well. But also you have to be willing to listen, and you have to hear, what has been working well for this university in the past. What are things where we find that there are areas for improvement? Every situation, like we talked about, every situation is a little bit different. And so I think coming into a new situation, you obviously want to have a vision and you want to have a plan to move forward, but you also have to be able to listen to the people that have been there and the people that have been kind of seeing what some of the challenges are and where there are opportunities for growth and improvement. And so, like JC said, it all starts with the relationships, and developing those relationships intentionally with student athletes, with other support staff areas that you're going to have to work with sport coaches, especially on the Olympic side. You're going to be working with lots of different sport coaches, and some of the team cultures are going to be different from team to team. And so how can you be a part of enhancing a team's culture while still sticking to your principles and kind of having a unified culture as a strength and conditioning department? And that's a challenge. I think, it's very dependent on, the types of coaches that you have and the types of programs. And I'm fortunate that I think we have a lot of really good coaches here at Georgia State, and a lot of coaches that really do want the best for their student athletes. Obviously, we all want to win. We all want to perform at a high level. But when you have coaches that care for the kids, it makes that part of it a lot easier. When everyone understands that, hey, we want to compete at a high level, but we also want an awesome experience for these kids. Hopefully those things aren't conflicting. Hopefully you can do both of those things together. But I think that's where it starts with, what do I want to be about? What do we want to be marked by as a department? And then how do I communicate those things, and how do we implement those things? And so it's not an overnight process by any stretch. And you learn about the challenges, especially in the first year. New things pop up, especially this strength and conditioning is cyclical, right? We're following an academic calendar and seasons. So, it's been a fun process. It's a challenging process. But again, it's super rewarding. I mean, you get to develop the relationships with the rest of the staff and with student athletes, and you're a part of helping kids reach their potential. You're a part of helping kids reach their goals, and I think that's kind of the most fun part of it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great answer. And it's funny, just to go back to something you said, you talked about when you come into a place, right, I want to figure out a way to sort of have this change, but I want the change to almost be so subtle, right, that no one really notices that there's a massive change going on, right? Like I'm going to find out what took place prior to me being here, what was working well, right? And I don't want to come in, guns a-blazing per se, right? And say, hey, I'm the boss, I'm the new sheriff in town. This is how things are going to roll, right? So, JC, going back to you, because obviously you're in a similar position, right? Like you had taken on, this is what you're going on your second year, right? This would be your second summer essentially, right? So when you came in, right, you same thing, like you had some ideas in mind, you had some, you're coming out of a position where you're like, wow, I'm finally going to have my own. Like, this is going to be my baby. I'm going to be able to do things. But I know when you and I talked, you kind of had a similar outlook. It was like, well, let me find out what the guy prior to me did well, right? And so I'll let you talk about that process a little bit and the relationship that you have with football and obviously Olympic sports for that matter, right? And I'll go back to JD and kind of have a follow-up question on that. But just to talk about that thought process a little bit, like, how do you make that transition as seamless as possible? And what are some of the things that you've had success with so far?
Well, when I got here about last May, our athletic performance staff, I want to say we had, excluding myself, 4 other full-time and 6 GAs. So as you can imagine, number one, that's a lot of people just from an athletic performance perspective. And then looking into the football staff and everything else, you can already go ahead and assume that connections were built. Anytime you come into a new atmosphere, a new environment like that, like at least from my personal perspective, it doesn't do you any good to just be like, okay, the guy that was here previously, like we're just, like you guys said, get rid of everything that he did. You're going to put new banners up. This is my show now and all that kind of stuff. Like build upon the good things that he did. Because otherwise right there, you're going to turn half of your team off probably, because it's going to be a safe assumption that at least some of the kids, some of the different coaches, like they liked what he was doing. So you want to in and basically put what he did that was on a positive note up on a pedestal, be like, hey, like we're going to continue to build upon that. You don't have to like highlight anything negative. You can address the weaknesses or whatever that you might see and maybe behind closed doors within your own staff kind of address like, hey, this is some different changes I want to do. I know you've done this before. Or even go a step further and be like, why were you guys doing this? Do you guys know why you're doing this? And then kind of explain to them that it's going to be your goal now as the new guy taking over. Like if someone were to ask you that after I leave, now you can explain exactly why you were doing something and kind of have some proof to the method or at least explanation. Because as I kind of stated in the previous question, it's ultimately always going to be about the why. And if you can't kind of explain why something's in your program, then you kind of have to question why it's there. So you've mentioned, I know we had numerous conversations. We've all had experiences where you come into a new program or you're taking over a program from somebody else. And unfortunately, sometimes it gets a little bit more blasted out that a coach will put a negative point on that previous coach instead of kind of building up from where they've already been and building bridges instead of burning those bridges with the players before. So I think that was, I mean, thankfully from our conversations and stuff, I think that was kind of my method coming into the situation here. And it's worked out well so far. I've been able to continue to build those relationships with all the kids. And I've even reached out to the guy that was here previously and tried to get some insight from him as well. So
you reached out to him. That's awesome, man. That's huge. And so, yeah, I mean, that kind of leads me to my next question. And JD, you can start with this. So this is what I think, we have a really interesting dynamic here because JD and JC here have obviously both worked in Olympic and football, right? And now, obviously, JC are solely football and JD, you're on the Olympic side. So if we're talking about, and this is something that I have no data to go off of this, right? But we see a lot of times when football staffs get cleared out, the strength coach just has to go with them, right? Like it's just kind of understood. And that's what you're told when you get into this field, right? It's like, well, if you're going to get into football strength and conditioning, just know that, you're kind of attached to a football coach. So if he decides to leave or things don't work out, you're getting cleared out with him, right? And then, then you kind of start to see along the lines, like, maybe some of these like mid-major schools and these mid-major conferences, football coach leaves or decides he wants to go a different route, or maybe he moves up, or maybe he, decides to, maybe he gets fired, whatever the case is. And some of these strength coaches are still having the ability to stick around. And so I tried to dig a little deeper and I would just find out, again, this is just pure like question based, right? And a lot of it had to do with the relationship that they had established and the network that they had created and the connections they had with the people on the Olympic side and just everybody in general within that department, right? So I wondered myself, and I kind of like asked some people, and they were like, well, yeah, I mean, it seems like you can really do yourself some justice by continuing to kind of try to create some connections with the Olympic staff, and you can probably save your job in some way, shape, or form. At some of the bigger schools, that might not be the case. Like that probably won't be possible, or may not be possible, depending, right? But I think, just from your perspective, right, you don't have to talk specifically about the relationship between, Georgia State football and Georgia State Olympic, whatever it is, but just your experience with Olympic sports and the relationship with football. Like, is there something to be salvaged there from the football perspective where you'd say, yes, coaches could really do themselves, a better service by trying to integrate themselves as one with Olympic sports, not from like an actual like hierarchical structure, but more so from just the standpoint of we know each other's names, we work together, we collaborate, we have a little bit more unison. So when things come down to it, it's like, well, no, he's our guy, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, ways you've seen it work and things that can improve.
Yeah, I mean, that's challenging. From school to school, I think it's really different. Obviously, like you said, I guess as an Olympic strength coach, I've never been asked about the fate of a football strength coach if people are coming or going.
Right.
And, I doubt that was the case when I was on the football side either. Whether, my fate was decided. But I do think there is something to be said for building a department. I think, a lot of the things that Bob Alejo talks about as far as building a structure in the administration that can oversee strength and conditioning effectively, I think is really important. But it's a double-edged sword because, as a football strength coach, a lot of guys expect if my head football coach moves up to the big job, then I'm going with him. Right. But then on the other side of the coin, if he moves out, is fired or moves somewhere else or, wants to go in a different direction, for a strength coach, then you expect to have your job saved. It's kind of hard because, there's opportunity on one side to work for somebody and work in close relationship with somebody. But on the other side, you can put yourself in a really tough position. I think I think it always helps to have relationships with the other strength coaches, whether that's football, Olympic sports, vice versa. Just about every place that I've been, there's been good relationships where there's been opportunities to share. I think there have been some spots where it's been a little bit tighter, but in every spot it's been a good working relationship. And there's such a big opportunity to learn from each other, to be completely honest, because you'll find there might be 3 or 4 guys, maybe 5 on a football staff, and they all have different backgrounds. Same on the Olympic side. Everybody's got different areas of expertise or different areas that they're interested in studying. And so, now if we can kind of come together, those relationships can help make our programs better for our student athletes. And I think those working relationships in a lot of places that don't have a football weight room and a basketball weight room and all these sorts of things where you're sharing facilities or you're sharing resources. I mean, I think those relationships can go a long way in making those departments more functional. But I think, the best answer, I think, is working to find an administrative model where we have somebody that really understands strength and conditioning and can evaluate strength and conditioning coaches and implement good hiring practices and good evaluation processes and great feedback. I think that's going to be where we kind of take the next step as a pretty much as a field, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a great answer, JC. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, because obviously this is what I like about this, right? Because you're on the football side, right? And so I've heard so many times like, yeah, I don't know, man. You talk to somebody and they're like, yeah, a guy we used to work for lost his job, but I mean, man, like had he just figured out a way to try to establish himself within, the community and not just be, hey, I'm football and the rest of you guys are whatever you are, right? Like, do you feel that have you done a pretty good job of that there? I know you talked about a little bit so far the holistic approach that you've tried to have in nature, but as far as your thoughts on ways that we can continue to improve that and maybe create a little bit more, is that maybe a low-hanging fruit for some stability for the football strength coach?
No, I think you got to kind of always do the best to make those connections, and kind of even taking a step back towards like whenever I was an assistant there at UConn, like taking advantage of when you do have an Olympic sport, because you kind of never do know. I mean, if you can create a niche or create an environment where that Olympic sport really loves you and wants to hang on to you, then you're just giving yourself an added layer of security for if something does happen, depending upon your position. Now, is it always going to work out? No. But and kind of following along those lines, now that I've shifted here to Lindenwood, we have done a great job with our community, doing community service, outreach, stuff like that, trying to make a presence known, not only from football, but we'll do that with athletic performance and our coaches getting out. But I also know that, such as we've discussed multiple times, as far as like not just staying in your silo and basically always venturing out to, whether it's the ATs. I make it a point of my day whenever we do have normal days and everybody's here on campus that, like, yes, I'll have my lifts in the weight room. I'll have my duties and stuff I got to get done here, but I'm going to make sure that I walk over to the AT, talk to the AT. I walk over to admin, because that's where our football coaches are at as well. I'm going to talk to all the football coaches. I'm going to make face. I'm going to say hi to Lisa, our front desk secretary, just all those little connections, whether it's admin, sport coaches, and that kind of stuff, to hopefully, as you guys have pointed out, just kind of dig yourself in a little bit deeper to the culture of the university to hopefully weather those types of storms. I couldn't really say if that's entirely foolproof once you get up to some of the higher levels, but as you were mentioned, like the mid levels and D2 and stuff like that, like it's all just about creating impact and letting people know your worth more so than anything, and just impacting all those different silos. So creating that common language, talking to all the different people, and just solidifying the university and bringing everything together. If you can do that as a coach, then there's going to be a lot of people that stick up for you come any kind of bad weather or change.
Yeah. I'll piggyback off that. Sorry, Ant.
No, you're good. Yeah. I was going to go back to you anyway.
Because I do think, I do agree with you. I think you build up a lot of goodwill, and you show that you're willing to invest in the university and in the community. I think that's really huge. I agree also that, at certain levels and in certain situations, one person is making the call, and so, they may or may not ask for opinions, but I will say, especially on the Olympic side, I think it goes a long ways. I think it goes a long ways in developing relationships with sport coaches and as a part of a staff, because when you're on the Olympic side and you have multiple teams, you're really more a part of the department than you are of one sport coaching staff. And so I think that really makes a big difference when, you have conflict now with somebody that you have good relationship with. Now I understand, hey, you've done a really good job and you have my athlete's best interest in mind. We have conflict. Let's resolve it, rather than, hey, I know you're just the strength guy, don't have much relationship with you. We have conflict. That guy doesn't know what he's doing. And, and it creates kind of divides. I think when you have good working relationships, now people are coming at it understanding that we both have the same end goal in mind. And even if our opinions are different, we can work through those things, rather than a poor working relationship. Now, when we have conflict, it gets really easy to write the other person off as, not knowing what they're doing. And I see that a lot in Olympic sports. And I think obviously, you can see that a little bit in football as well. But no matter what you're doing, what industry you're in, relationships are huge. They really are. And you'll see, you'll see people in strength and conditioning that don't know anything about strength and conditioning, but are awesome in relationships. I'm talking about people in particular, anyone in particular, but, it's in every industry. If you're good at relationships, you're going to put yourself in a really good position. Now, hopefully you also understand what you're hired to be doing, because that's really important, obviously, from our standpoint. But relationships are huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was actually just looking at the study the other day where, behavioral psychologists have been able to prove time and time again that a lot of leaders aren't necessarily the most competent at what they do, right? But there's this, I think the word used in what I was reading was charisma, and their ability to obviously find, a way to create some connectivity and build a following and whatnot, right? So from like a technical standpoint, a lot of what you see, and there were a bunch of other traits that they had seen, right, as far as like body language and their mannerisms and how much they can really, feed off of and understand, what type of person someone is just by the type of tone and the voice that they use and whatnot and all this. So it was really interesting, actually. But ultimately, I think that's what we're talking about here is you see a lot of leaders in our industry, or just leaders in general, guys who are put in roles that you're director, CEO, whatever it is, whatever your profession is. And, their ability to understand things, maybe generalized in some nature, but they've specified and specialized in the ability to get people to lead, follow them, right? And it's almost like I think, is it Jocko who talks about the idea of leadership being manipulation, right? It's not like a pretty word to use, I think is how he describes it, but in some way, shape, or form, like you're trying to get people to follow you and believe in a central philosophy, right? And in order to do that, everybody's going to have a different way that you kind of got to tie them in and get them going and, following you, right? Like everyone's going to have different incentives and different things that you got to attack. And it's on you guys, obviously, as leaders and as directors of your programs to identify, all right, that's what makes this guy tick. That's what makes this woman tick. This is what I need to really get them to believe in me and to move forward. So obviously it's going to take some legitimate, restructuring and reformatting of a hierarchy and of a system in American sport before we can really get to a point where there is that stability. But I think we've, at least here right now, settled on the idea that the low-hanging fruit could be, hey, reach out to the people that you're working with, create some connections, have good relationships, right? Put yourself in a position where you can actually be backed by other people and work together and whatnot. So as far as like hiring processes go for you guys and the relationships, right? Like my thing was always like, we should stop hiring. Like I think credentials are important, right? But the idea and the concept of someone being able to explain concepts and to have an interest in something that they want to accomplish will probably lead them in the direction, or at least give you a good indication as to whether they're going to be successful in your program or not. So in the hiring process of what you guys do you really try to just drive home and take a look at this concept of interest where, an example would be like, yes, it's like you are fascinating, you're phenomenal, you have a brilliant workup on your resume, and you really crushed the part of the interview that shows me that you're able to handle the physiotherapeutic methods of being in sports medicine. Absolutely phenomenal, great stuff, right? What would you feel comfortable saying? What's your interest in saying, what's your interest in talking about, some technical, tactical schemes, or what's your interest in understanding, speed development strategies for, late SPP phases, right? Like those conversations probably aren't coming up in most places, or maybe they are. And I'm just, stuck in a conclave in my basement and I don't know about them, but right. Like, what do you guys think about those things? Is it something that you could see us moving in a direction of? Because at the end of the day, everything you guys have already alluded to, right, is if we could create a relationship where everybody understands a little bit about each other's piece and how it all reflects inward towards the athlete, which is essentially this globalization, right? This training load management that works off of a singular blueprint, right? Like, how do you guys go about trying to like work in that direction when it comes to the people you bring into your program?
And pushing the global load management.
Yeah,
propaganda. No, it's all good. I'm just giving you a hard time.
You figure that one out, and you're going to be a millionaire, dude. Everybody's looking for that.
No, I agree.
Everyone is hanging on this question right now, and the strength and conditioning industry rests in the balance of the answers that you guys provide right here, right now.
I like to give you a hard time about when you talk about that, Ant, but I do agree with you. I think that's obviously the ultimate goal. But I do think, I've realized, how important it is to get the right people on the bus. I think I'm obviously not the first person to say that, but a more robust hiring process and pain that can produce, I think, is well worth the payoff in the end. I think, there's an opportunity and as an athletic department to have different area leads be a part of interview processes and see, is this somebody that could work well or could work collaboratively with my area, and I think that's really important. But I also think it's really important to get the right people and the people that have a similar vision or at least can buy into the vision that you're pitching, because it gets really difficult to take somebody that is doing it one way and completely change in the time frame that you kind of have to get things moving in a strength and conditioning job. And so that's pretty much why I think that's a big reason why you see a lot of the buddy hires in strength and conditioning is, hey, I already know this person. I know we're on the same page. We're in lockstep. Like, let's go forward and hit the ground running, rather than let me take a bunch of time. Let me take a little bit of risk, in hiring somebody that I may not know, or going through this big process and, ideally I can trust my process and trust that I'm bringing in somebody that will work well with me, but there is a little more inherent risk if you don't know somebody, if you haven't worked with them in the past. And I think it's hard to get away from that, especially with the huge money and, that's in football and, the expectations that are changing things in the snap of fingers. A lot of people want to make sure that I'm hitting the ground running. And I'm not necessarily saying that I think that's the right way to do it, but I totally understand why it is the way that it is. But you're right. The things that you're talking about as far as, bringing everybody together and having, basically a global strategy as far as how to get these athletes prepared and how to make sure that we've got the best team possible. You really have to have the right people on the bus that have the education and experience and interest in learning more about it, because there are not many people that have the expertise to do it all right now, and to put it all together. But I think if you got the right people in the room that had the interest in wanting to do it together, I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's huge. And I think obviously if we, going back to, what you talked about before, being able to be assessed on a pretty, I guess you call it, the evaluation platform should be somewhat fair, right? And for it to be fair, it needs to be somebody you can actually assess what's going on from a, physical performance standpoint, from a technical, tactical standpoint, from the sports medicine perspective, right? But at the end of the day, we're all coaching movement in one way, shape or form, right? So at the end of the day, we should probably all have some singular vision as to like how we want to load the athlete. And I think it's tough though, because I think there's a lot of football coaches who are interested in understanding a little bit more about the physical prep. And I think there's a lot of athletic trainers, right? And people in sports medicine who are interested in understanding a little bit more about physical prep. And there's a lot of strength coaches who really are dying to understand a little bit more about the game demands, because that's what they understand that everything needs to be based off of. So if that interest is there, I think it's, like I said, I think it's perfect, right? But if someone's just not, generally not interested in understanding about, force velocity profiling, I'm not even saying that we need even to go that deep, just understanding why you may do something on a specific day and, the qualities of, their sport, right? If they don't have an interest in learning that, right? JC, would you agree? Is that probably no, but there's probably not much that you can do there, right? Interest is the big factor there.
I'm going to embrace my inner.
Agree with me.
Embrace my inner Jocko and say it is a dichotomy, my friend. All right, I'm going to throw that one out there. I'm going to start with I agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, if you swing that all the way to one end of the spectrum and they can speak that language, they know their data, they know all the intricacies, the X and O's, the technical, tactical, all that kind of stuff. Well, they can't relate to any of the players, or they can't coach, then sports science maybe, and then they can help relay that data to the athletic performance coaches or whatever. So, but if you're actually on the field helping to cue up the movements and all that kind of stuff, I would say that I would almost, depending upon the position, want a little bit more of the side that can get the relation, can speak with the kids know they care about them, and then have that search and thirst for knowledge be added on it. You don't want somebody that's all the way on this end of the spectrum where they just want to be buddy with them, and they're not really looking for that continued education. They're not looking to grow and expand in the profession, and they're just a yes man basically. That's just someone blindly following, which we don't need that. And you don't want the guy that is just straight science. He belongs in a lab, and then he doesn't know how to speak to anybody. So it just like anything else, it's kind of finding that balance. I think part of the good thing within our staff, and when we're looking at hires for whether it's an intern, GA, assistant, full-time, all those different things is we sit down and as a staff we'll do interviews, and it gives everybody a chance to kind of critique and see that process. And it gives one of the things I want people to be open to criticizing me. If we're talking about education, I'm talking about I want people that want to build those relationships, then I have to also be open to a little bit of criticism from the coaches underneath me, so that I understand what I need to develop on. So we have that common language. If we have the common language and the common knowledge, but we can't take a little bit of jibber jabber and bounce some ideas off of each other, then you are ultimately just dealing with the yes man on this side and the relationship. So I do think all that is very important. And I know that we've talked about it in great length as far as wishing that the entire industry had kind of that common language. And you use the example multiple times of the chef in the kitchen and him working his way up, and he knows each of the duties, whether it's the soup, whether it's busting tables, whether it's doing this or that. he knows everything and he can speak all those languages. And hopefully someday we can get to that point within the industry. But I think that's a good place to start within your own department and get that common language. And then, as kind of like I mentioned in the previous question, like find a way that you can get that common language with the ATs, with the sport coaches and stuff like that. Build that silo at your university, because we can't even get it there to begin with. And how are we supposed to grow it out into the entire industry?
I'll say something I think would be really interesting is, if athletic performance coaches and strength coaches start to work towards the realm of being head sport coaches, because right now the head sport coach controls kind of has the ability to control a lot of those areas, right? And so if we have somebody that has the understanding of the physical prep, the tactical, technical, really, what's happening from a global load standpoint to the athlete, and has enough of an understanding about the sports medicine and rehabilitation side of things, ideally that would be kind of the perfect scenario. The thing is, right now, they're all three very separate tracks, right? You're either going athletic performance, you're going sport coaching, you're going athletic medicine. And, we don't really have a person that's kind of dabbled in all three generally. There are a few people here and there that I think have done it. And, I know we talk a lot about, some of James Smith's ideas and looking at, what does the ultimate model look like, and it's a challenge to get there. I think it's a challenge to get there, but I do think it will be interesting to see if, we do have some strength and conditioning coaches that want to make the transition over to be on kind of more quote unquote the sport coaching side, and seeing if, they handle practice structures differently, where they handle athletic medicine and strength and conditioning and those sorts of things differently. And if that makes a difference or not, if that's, does kind of get us closer towards more optimal performance. But that's kind of, I've said it before, obviously there's a lot that you have to learn as going from a strength coach to a sport coach from a tactical standpoint. Ideally, we've talked about this before, ideally you're starting to understand some of the technical aspects of the sport. When you're spending time around the sport and you're programming for the things that are happening in that sport, so hopefully you're starting to learn some of those things. And, I bet there are strength coaches out there, though, that are pretty good tacticians after watching sport for 20 years and being part of every practice and all that sort of thing. I mean, heck, I think Andrea Hootie was talking on a podcast the other day, and she's like, I could give you Kansas basketball practice right now. She goes, I just write it down exactly what we're doing and all those sorts of things, from all her time she spent there with the same staff. So, but it's super interesting. It's just, it's, a challenge to see how do we get there, and what you really do is you hope when staffs are really making that push, you hope that they have a lot of success, and I think we've talked about some of the staffs that appear from an outside perspective to be making that push, and you hope that, it makes big changes and other people kind of take notice.
Yeah, absolutely. So you do think that, if you could maybe want to provide like a timeline, you do think that there will be more strength and conditioning individuals and professionals who start to make their way into sport coaching, in comparison to the reverse, where you would have sport coaches kind of working their way into the physical prep? If you do see that, like what's that look like in maybe like 15 years, maybe 10, 15 years? You think that might be something that we see more often?
I don't know. I think it's going to take some special individuals, because I think sport coaches already are to some extent in the physical prep realm. I mean, at the high school level, right? Like a lot of the sport coaches are taking care of the physical prep, so they're already a part of that. Small college level, that can be a thing as well. I think one thing that we've discussed that's really interesting is Scott Cochran moving from the head strength and conditioning job to the special teams job at Georgia. And I don't know Coach Cochran personally, and I don't know the whole story, but from what's reported is true, that he wants to eventually be a head football coach. That could be kind of interesting, of a guy that was a strength coach at the highest level in college and making his way over to a head football coach. If it goes that way, that could be that could kind of be a door opener for a lot of people. But it's hard to put a timeline on it. I don't know. I think some people get into strength and conditioning because they don't want to be sport coaches, right? Like JC, like you said, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. And I think you point out something that's really important to understand, right? Is you think that a lot of sport coaches are already handling some of the physical prep, and obviously they are at some of the lower levels, right, in high school and whatnot. And I think it's super valuable. But I think that is the main message here, is that we disassociate training from a physical standpoint from practice, right? Which is obviously just another form of loading the athlete from a technical, tactical perspective. So I think that that's really where that disconnect lies. And I think where I saw it best and where I really tried to like get it to is I tried to attack it from, like I said, if I believe that we're all movement coaches in the end and we're just trying to figure out ways to manipulate movement, then if that is kind of like that universal medium that we're going to work through, well, I found some success, and I thought it was a really interesting scenario when we would say take the first 3 to 4 weeks of like general movement qualities, general movement skills, such as like shuffling, understanding how to cut off of your inside and outside leg. And, JC, we talked a little bit about this, doing some of the stuff with women's lax when you were at UConn. And I was able to actually kind of see it through to where once it became time where these general movement skills were going to move into some more specified movement skills, I actually brought the sport coaches on the field with me, number one, because the athlete then sees, well, wow, like my strength coach, yes, he's coaching me in this like training setting, but my sport coach is also with him, and there's talking together, there's dialogue, and they're trying to figure out ways to, have some connectivity, right? So there's a little bit more buy-in there, right? There's some context for the athlete. And I think it also shows the sport coach that, hey, at the end of the day, like we're really trying to just manipulate loading and understand the different ways that we want to do it from a movement skill standpoint, right? So we started to get into some of the more tactical movement skills, like the competition movements for lax. And we even did it with football, doing some DBs and the wide receivers. And we had our DB coach and our wide receiver coach out there. I'm like, hey, come out onto the field. This is what I'm looking for. Tell me what you might be looking for, right? And we can kind of adjust going from there. So, I don't know. I think that stuff is really interesting to me. I think that there is something to be had there. And I think at the end of the day, good or bad, the reality is it's all kind of one thing, right? Like we're physically loading the athlete. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, I think that's huge. I know JC probably got to jump in here in a second, but like, I mean, really being in lockstep with the sport coach, from a technical standpoint, and then doing some, tactical specific movements, I think is really big. I remember, we started to head that direction when, one of the first things we did with Coach Klein at UConn was he sent us all out to spring practice and said, go to the drills and make notes on some of the cues that coaches are using with their athletes. Sure. So we can be speaking a similar language as kind of a jumping off point, but growing from there and working with the coaches on, what are specific things that you're looking for? What are things that, allow your athletes to be successful in the tactical positions we're going to put them in, and how can we implement that as a part of training? I mean, I even look at I've been on the volleyball court or on the basketball court with coaches doing things myself of like, all right, is this how you teach it? And what is the verbiage that you use, and how can make sure that we're together on that, so they're not hearing one thing from me and something completely separate when we're trying to talk about the same thing. I mean, that's just not efficient in any way, shape, or form. Not
efficient. And you could also make the point that when it comes to some of those general qualities that you're looking for, right, when it comes to sports medicine and some athletic training, return to play protocols, right, if A skips or B, butt kicks are a part of that return to play protocol, and you're using it as an evaluative or an assessment platform to be able to see certain things, right? Shouldn't you guys have some common language between how each of those movements are coached, right? As opposed to just do butt kicks. But that's a different rabbit hole for a different time. But just to go to JC, I want to first of all comment on what you said before. I agree. Right now we're in the process of really trying to bring the technical to the tactical as far as the lab to the field and vice versa. Give sports scientists an opportunity to understand coach speak, right, and give coaches understand the opportunity to understand lab work and some sports science and whatnot and data and analytics, right? But I do agree, and this is something that I say a lot and I say often in our virtual presentations. So we have to do virtual presentations for recruits now, right? So the catapult GPS system does not measure adrenaline, emotion, passion. Those are intrinsic factors that it does not measure, right? And that's what you kind of alluded to. I agree. And I want to make sure that that's out there, that there is no, GPS unit that can measure those things, right? There's no monitor that can say, all right, well, yes, I'm going to give you all these external metrics, but I'm also going to let you know, some of the decision making, the psychology of what this athlete maybe thinks. It's just not there, right? So you want to have someone who's a coach first, a human first, and understands that psychological component, like we talked about, that behavioral analysis. But JC, yeah, if you just want to give some of your thoughts on everything we've been talking about here, I know you got some pretty good ideas as well.
Well, I'm kind of like just been thinking over my head. You're like, give me a timeline, and same as JD, I don't know that I could necessarily say like this is a realistic expectation, but like just kind of going through it in my mind right now. If I look at our specific scenario here at Lindenwood, just speaking personally from a football perspective, our head football coach, Coach Stugart, is awesome in the fact that he is not a micromanager. He's very hands off. So essentially, you have him as the head guy. And then, I mean, if you look at any other kind of hierarchy or whatever, then you would have the O coordinator, the D coordinator, myself, with the three separate, like they're controlling those different aspects. But I kind of wonder about how unrealistic it is to then maybe one day, as far as there's head coaches that are the offensive coordinators, there's head coaches that are the defensive coordinators. Why can't we have a head coach that's also the strength coach? Like now, also, I mean, it's a double-edged sword because you have that, then you're chopping a job away from somebody that's out looking for a head strength coach job. So, yeah, right. Kind of start leading down that path, then you could get some ugly things. But, I mean, like you said, if you get the right individual, I mean, who's to say that that's not a system that couldn't work? It works really awesome right now when you do have that head guy that does say, hey, you're the expert. Like, I'm going to listen to you. We've had dialogue already about, okay, what are some of the things that we're going to do in order to try and prep for coming back from quarantine and make some smart decisions as far as when camp rolls around, to where we can do our best to limit any kind of soft tissue injuries and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, for the time being right now, it's an awesome system as far as having that non-micromanagement and just a continued dialogue. And then even more so, getting into what you said, and I kind of echoed in some previous talks, is like, if you can get your university, you can get the system that you're in to have that common language, to where, like, when you're doing the ACL return to play and the AT can look at you and be like, all right, this week we need to get into some skip patterns. We need to be able to do this. So I want to see what the A skip looks like, the high knee butt kicks. I want to see them go through that, so on and so forth. And it's not just like, okay, we're returning from ACL. I'm going to have them go out there and run zigzags. And then, like, in the weight room, I'm trying to do my own different thing. And there's just a little bit of communication there. Like what we've talked about, I want to have that common language, and I want everybody to be on the same page when it comes to that stuff. But circling back around, I would be curious, is it so far-fetched to think that, yes, if you've got the O coordinator, D coordinator, and the strength coach, why can't they slip up to part-time position with their head coach and strength coach? So that's kind of –
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because at the end of the day, right, and I think Mike Guardango said this before, right, if there was an interest from sport coaches to really dive into physical prep, yeah, we're out of jobs, right? And it doesn't seem like there is a ton of interest, right, to truly, for some of these guys to truly go in that direction. But yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if they do go in that direction. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that our profession exists, and it's because there isn't a ton of interest from sport coaches to handle the physical prep as well, despite it kind of being a part of the loading scheme. And not to knock on athletic trainers or sports med. I mean, obviously there's brilliant athletic trainers and brilliant sports medicine professionals across the world who I, learn from on a daily basis, right? But I do think what we're trying to say here is, I think more along the lines of, if you have a technical model as far as what you're looking for from a movement quality standpoint in either return to play scenarios or performance perspectives, there probably is a little bit better of a chance of having a universal language and some commonalities between you guys, and maybe a little bit easier of an assessment platform as well. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, that's its own beast. But moving forward here, I think, I don't know, I got maybe 5 minutes left. I want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of like going back to what we talked about before. There's obviously certain drivers and things that you guys are really passionate about. I think what's really interesting, like one day, if someone's dumb enough to actually hire me as a head strength coach and gives me the opportunity to hire a bunch of people underneath me, one thing I really want to do is I want to try and figure out, because this is the way I think, like being an assistant, I'm thinking to myself, I want to know what people's niche, what is their thing that they really, really like to see done in terms of the program, right? Because if they feel that I'm making an effort as their director to really dive into that piece and put an emphasis on that piece, like, hey, I'm really, really interested in max velocity work and understanding a little bit more about, how certain plyometrics can really, like, whatever. Maybe it's the technicality of the Olympic lift. Maybe they love that stuff, right? It's like, well, all right, like, I may or may not believe in Olympic lifts, but since you do so much, and then this goes for coaches and athletes alike, right? Like, because you do so much, I'm going to figure out a way to really put an emphasis on that, because I know your buy-in as an assistant, right? Someone who obviously is not making as much money and is working a ton of hours, right? Your buy-in is going to be much greater towards the central philosophy, right? So really digging in there. So, I mean, if you guys, what are those things for you? It can be in the training process. It doesn't have to be, but what are those things for you that you're like, man, I am, it could be something that you've been, obsessed with for years, and it's a problem you're really trying to solve and it really drives you, or it could be something that you recently just have, dug down a certain rabbit hole and some things you're really interested in, some concepts or whatever. And where do you go to try and continue to learn about those things and perfect that craft and try to really develop on whatever that is? What is that like I said, that problem that like torments you guys that you really want to see implemented in your program, that you see as a massive vital part of the strength and conditioning program? JD, if you want to go first, you can.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think during my time at UConn, I got really interested in some capacity in speed training. And, I guess early on in your career, there are going to be certain things that you have more interest in, but you have to learn so much that, it can be almost detrimental to dive so deeply into a topic while neglecting other things, like when you're a young strength coach. I think I guess I can take that back a little bit. If you can dive deeply into a certain topic while continuing to learn about other things and not neglecting them, that can be useful because it can set you apart. And so I guess I'd take back that first statement. But, honestly, at Minnesota, my first full-time job, I was learning about a lot of different things. I was working with a bunch of different teams, and we had different needs, and was learning about different training philosophies, and different coaches that I worked with were doing things differently. And so I felt like I was taking in a lot of information from a lot of different places. Well, fast forward to UConn, I got very interested in speed development at a certain point. It wasn't necessarily right away. I'd always had, obviously, some interest in speed development, but during my time at UConn, I got really interested and started looking at a lot of stuff by Charlie Francis and Derek Hansen and Tony Holler with his Feed the Cats and Dr. Matt Ray. And, I think it's almost funny now because now I work with court sports and sports that never really truly reach top velocity. So, yeah, right. I've got volleyball and beach volleyball and basketball, so basketball is maybe the closest one, but, I think there's a lot of really good information on speed training right now. I think Dr. Matt Ray is awesome. Dr. Marin is awesome with a lot of the stuff that he's putting out. Coach Dietz, Cal Dietz and Chris Korfus, that put out a lot of good information. Tony Holler's put out a ton of good information. And obviously Derek Hansen, putting out a lot of information and taking things from what he learned with Charlie Francis. I think there's a ton of really good information out there, and people are seeing, now that, hey, like if I prioritize speed training, that's going to help a lot of different aspects of my game, especially in a field sport, a sport like football, sport like, rugby, that sort of thing. Obviously, Kier went and flattened a lot of things that he's putting out. And really, like, when I talk about like trying to learn about these things, there's a couple of different areas that you go to. You go to some of the classics and some of what do we understand about what's kind of been known about speed training in the past, and then, what are people doing now practically? Because they'll say a lot of times the field is in front of the research. The research is kind of catching up in some cases, but I think sometimes the research then validates some of the things that have been doing in the field or disproves things that have been done in the field. But, now we also have some really good people that are doing both. They're doing research and coaching, which I think is really cool. And so, that's something that I've found very interesting. And you find, even in a lot of those people, you find conflicting philosophies. I think Dr. Ray just put out an analysis he did and said that enhancing mechanics accounted for 3% of the difference in speed improvement with his athletes.
I saw that.
You know, it's super interesting though, right? Like, and you kind of are like, okay, I want to learn more about how you did that analysis and what brought you to those conclusions. And even like in some of the language, you know, some people were asking like, you know, when you're talking about intermuscular and intramuscular coordination patterns, does that not bleed over into mechanics? And he said, well, they're different concepts, but I think he's going to get more into that in his article. But it's super interesting, right? Because, you know, you have some different philosophies even within some people that are coaching guys at the top level. So, you know, I think speed training and learning how to prioritize speed training and what that means for your weight room program is very interesting, because I think a lot of people like to say, I'm going to prioritize speed training, but their weight room program, you know, you probably couldn't discern that this is a program that prioritizes speed training. You would not know by their weight room program. And if you really are prioritizing it, you know, you understand what that stimulus and the weight room can do, helpful or hurtful. And so,
right.
So that's super interesting to me. I'm not going to say that I have the answers by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something that's really interesting to me. And even though I don't work with field or big field sports currently directly, obviously I oversee some, like I'm going to continue to try and learn about it because it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. I wish we had more time to get into Dr. Matt Ray's stuff, because it is interesting when obviously you see the differences in findings, right, and all that kind of stuff. So it's yeah, maybe that'll be the next podcast. I like that. I might start doing my own podcast, to be honest with you. It's pretty cool. But no, in all seriousness, so yeah, that's its own rabbit hole, right? And it's crazy that, you know, but obviously he's doing a lot of good work. And like I said, there's so many different ways where, yeah, like you said, it's like, well, for the longest time, like I was always taught, well, yeah, I mean, right, like you first come out and there's like this whole, yeah, you get faster through the weight room, and then there's like, well, not really, right? And there's this whole movement based around like you know, the weight room really doesn't contribute all that much, right? Everything needs to be done through the field, and then there's a lot of people still think that, right? Or then you might say that a lot of people don't still think that, and everybody just still like lifts weights, or like whatever the case is, right? Like how much are you emphasizing of what? And Charlie's vertical integration does a nice job of really creating some comprehension there, but at the end of the day, yeah, I think Dr. Matt Ray is onto some things. And I think he's probably one who's finding things that he's not necessarily, and I don't know the man, but he's probably thinking to himself, I don't care what I find. I just want to find the truth. And I'm not necessarily interested in what I've felt prior to this and what I will feel going forward, right? That emotional attachment to certain things. And I think, you know, I'm just as guilty of that as anybody else, right? Of wanting, right, to kind of the things that I want to believe, right? You kind of gravitate towards some of those facts sometimes, right? You have like general facts, and then you have specific facts, and then, you know, you find yourself, you know, whether, you know, through no fault of your own, you just start to generally gravitate towards some of the general facts that satisfy that concept that you want to believe, right? So that's its own beast. But JC, going back to you, I mean, what are some of those things for you? You know, I know you've been a sponge and you've been around a ton of different people, and obviously you've got your own perspectives and your own interests. And I think, you know, but from a, you know, it doesn't have to be from a strength and conditioning perspective, but from an actual just obsession to, like, kind of like, where are you at right now? Some things that you're really trying to dig deeper into.
Well, we talked about it a little bit, and I'm glad that I got a chance to circle around back to this point that I made at the very beginning. I did say that whenever I was at Mizzou, that was like one of the best staffs that I've been a part of it. And further expanded upon that, that was the staff that I've been a part of that had the most comprehensive level system to what they were trying to accomplish in their weight room program and within their aspect of on the field, running, conditioning, all that kind of stuff. They had coaches that were specifically designated as your block 0, your level 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, and had exactly what they were trying to accomplish out of that. So as you guys know, that's kind of been, I got a bunch of extra spare time in my hands. What I've been trying to dive a little bit more deeper into with relation a little bit more towards the weight room. And I'm still soaking up from you guys. You guys are the movement experts. I can go to at any time. But just trying to figure out like, how do I create something that's going to continue to, number one, when they first get here, get that base as wide as possible, get the kids to understand the movements. And then the wider the base, the taller the peak. So I mean, going into it really briefly, like what we talked about, basically, like my thought process so far has been kind of for my block 0 to year 1 is just movements and getting them correctly there. So just hammering. I don't care if it's a goblet squat. We do the movement patterns. The actual list and stuff don't matter. The numbers don't matter. Getting them all to understand exactly what a squat is, have the common language, understand the cues, and understand what exactly I'm trying to accomplish when I hinge, whenever I'm doing a pull from the ground, whenever I'm doing a hang clean, and just having the common language to know that. And then moving into more of a load year 2 where they respect the weights. They understand what it means to control weight with an eccentric or hold at the bottom with an ISO, that kind of stuff, and teaching them that respect, like we talk about all the time. Kids are awesome. They want to get in there and work out, but they know truly the definition or the difference between working out and actually training and respecting what they're getting into that kind of stuff. I know you improve with that. And then by the time they get into that 3rd year, having a little bit more intent, teaching the difference, they've gotten a taste of the strength now, trying to work a little bit more on the power. Because we all have seen when we were at UConn, we had the tendos, and tendos are amazing, but still it was sometimes like pulling teeth to get these kids to understand what it meant to actually hit a number on the tendo and be powerful. Like they just wanted to always throw the weight on there, and you had to back them off. And, okay, this is the actual what we're trying to accomplish. So understanding power and intent. And then by that 4th year, getting into that mastery component and just being as smart as we can. Do you get to the point to where it is like, do you qualify something as they're strong enough? Do you keep kind of chasing that extra 10 pounds, whatever it might be? But well, as you mentioned too, at the very beginning, I've had a lot of great people that I've worked with. So, I mean, I've been kind of, if I've got a question that I can't really quite figure out the answer, and I'll do my due diligence to dive into it enough, but I'll reach out to House. I'll reach out to Coach King there at UConn, Coach Klein, whenever we were with him. He's another one that highly influenced me, just within the perspective of I truly appreciated how every semester he was trying to, okay, this worked really well. I'm going to keep that, but now let's try and tinker with this and figure out what we can do to make this that much better. There was no such thing as a stagnant program with Coach Klein. Like he always was looking for what could be built better and what could satisfy the needs of his athletes. Not just, it wasn't like, okay, all athletes are going to do this. It's UConn athletes are totally different than what he had at Minnesota. Minnesota is totally different than what he had at NIU, all that kind of stuff. So that's a little bit more of a general perspective. I haven't dove in specifically into the speed and hit my niche like that, but trying to build the grand outline and then dive a little bit deeper into it piece by piece.
Absolutely. That's a great answer. And yeah, big shout out to Coach Klein. So the legendary Coach Klein. Yeah, one of the more curious and knowledgeable strength coaches I've worked with, especially. I mean, I think a lot of times you hear, once you get to the director position, obviously you guys may be able to attest to this even though you're still young. I don't know, people are like, oh, well, yeah, you absorb a lot of information. Then when you get to the top ranks, there's a lot of other things you got to deal with, and you're not learning as fast or as frequently, or maybe the learning curve that you're going on or the pace that you're learning a little more granular. But yeah, Coach Klein, definitely one of the biggest learners that I've met, especially, with the amount of experience he's had as a head strength coach. He just continues to be curious. I mean, I think he'd be like hanging out in the office and be in there for like a couple hours, and he'd come out and he'd be like, oh, I just watched this video and you guys got to see it. And it's like, I think it was like the pose method of running was like the one. He's like, you got to come check this out. You know what I mean? It'll look like he just came out of a cave, and he's just like, yeah, so he's big into that stuff. And that's a great answer, JC. It seems like, obviously I'm a fan of figuring out ways to try to create a respect and a discipline for the training process, right? And it seems like you've been able to actually get that. So we're probably over time here, but whatever. So if you got, I'd say in like 30 seconds or less, obviously we're not super old yet, but if you can provide some sort of advice for the young professional, or maybe a mistake that you made that you wish you kind of, could go back and do over again. I know JC's probably no regrets, you know what I mean? But if there's anything like in 30 seconds or less, anything that you can provide as far as some insight or advice to the young professional, or any mistakes you wish you could have changed, JD, we'll start with you.
Man, I'd say a couple things. Find a mentor, find someone that's going to help you learn things. When you're there, take notes and try and take it all in, take advantage of the situation. Obviously, as an intern, the hours can be long and some of the work can be tedious, but try and soak it all in. And it's always worth it to think about how I would do it. If I was in this position, how would I do it? And making yourself some notes so when you get the opportunity, you can explain that. And the other thing is We talked about relationships, but do a great job and work on relationships. No relationship is too small to spend a little bit of time on. You'll realize that somebody that you interned with or somebody that maybe interned under you is someday going to be the person that is vouching for you at a job or in your career. So take time and be intentional in those relationships. And then obviously, like I said, do a great job. Be yourself, be authentic, and do what's asked and show your passion. Go over and above when there's an opportunity to, and you'll be in a good position.
No doubt. JC?
Get as many different experiences as you can. Don't accept like first internship. For instance, when I was at Eastern Michigan, it was great. I still use a ton of what I learned from Coach McKeefrey from an organizational standpoint, management, all those things. But without my opportunities that I have at Mizzou, with the Panthers in North Carolina, up with you guys in UConn, like if you're young, you don't have a family yet, get out and don't be stuck in your home state. Like I remember whenever I was transitioning from my GA at Eastern Michigan and going down towards Carolina to take that internship for the summer. A week and a half before I was supposed to report to Carolina, I still hadn't had a place to live. I was prepared to live out of my truck. Like, find a way to make it happen. I promise you're going to figure something out. It's going to be stressful. I accept that. But as long as you do your homework, then get as many different experiences as you can, and don't just accept like one piece of knowledge as the ultimate truth. As you heard from the previous question and answer, like always be searching for something, because if you think you found the answer, then chances are you're probably wrong and there's something else out there. So get the experiences and rack those up.
Are you telling Ant that he shouldn't be in Connecticut forever? Because I don't know, he might take offense to that.
Yeah, I talked to my agent. Her name is Celeste Grasso, my mom. She's not letting me go outside the state. So as far as being a movement mastery, JC, that is definitely something I am not, especially with the amount of homemade pasta I've eaten during this quarantine. Movement is something that I need to work on a little bit here. But hey, before we get off here, guys, do you want to, either one of you guys, Twitter, Instagram, people can follow you. You can shoot your email out there if you feel comfortable with it, whatever you guys want to do. But just a place, just a little info for people to be able to reach out to you and find some of your stuff, JD.
All my stuff is Twitter and Instagram is JD Mehlhorn. My last name's spelled a little goofy. It's Mehlhorn. I'll post things on there from time to time, probably more Twitter, thoughts and opinions and retweets of different things that I think are useful information. But feel free to reach out via email. My email is right in the Georgia State Staff Athletics Directory. And so it's jmehlhorn@gsu.edu. If you have any questions or want to talk about anything at all, I'm always willing.
Not exactly the biggest social media guru. I just go ahead and say, if you want to contact me via email, it's jhull, Hull, at lindenwood.edu, and I'd be more than happy to get back to you with any kind of questions you got. Love to talk shop with anybody, so that's all I got.
Solid.
Someone should email JC and ask him to demonstrate a high knee fold for you.
I will say
guys.
A YouTube page for all my athletes so they could actually see the demos. I do not demo. I make sure it's actually someone who can complete the demo.
Yeah, I need to. So you're not on that YouTube page at all?
I don't even remember the
bench press is it.
I'm not big time enough to actually have like my name in the top / YouTube. So you just have JC Hull, J.C.Hull, and I'm sure you'll find good or bad.
It's all good. It's all good stuff. Hey, I appreciate you guys hopping on here. I hope this was beneficial for you guys, and obviously I hope the people who are listening learn something from this. These, like I said at the beginning here, these are two great guys. I consider them friends, and I'm really happy to have met them. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and good talking to you guys. I'll probably text you guys in a little bit.
Yeah, appreciate it, Ant. Good to chat, JC. If you ever want to take a deeper dive in anything, we're figuring out ways to be available. Obviously, we covered a lot of topics, so
yeah. I'm thinking next time we can talk about, because I started thinking about the whole robust running and the chaotic environments, right? When JC was talking about like some of his cues and creating some a little bit more of the stable environments, right? Like, is there a place for that? And we can some of the Matt Ray stuff, and that's like a whole like different set of podcasts. So
even in the weight training, go ahead.
You're gonna have to just do that one with JD. He's gonna take up the entire time.
No, but even in the weight training aspect, right? Like I think levels are awesome, but you start to look at it though, like then what do you do from an individual programming standpoint, right? Within the level, and if speed is your priority, or what, there's lots of different things you can talk about from a conversational standpoint with that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Are we still going? Is this podcast still going, or is this post script?
I think so. I don't know. Just keep it going. Let's see how much we can get on the tape. You know what I mean?
And do you have an outro? Do you have like a sign off?
Yeah, it's I think it's like is Anthony Grasso one step closer to taking over the world, something like that. No, seriously, I appreciate you guys. But we should do something that maybe we should just put JC through a bunch of robust running protocols that like Bosch and John Private, and just see how robust he really is. You know what I mean? What can the bench press truly do for you?
No.
Hey, I'll tell you what. If we try these protocols on JC, and he can run, more than 20 yards in a straight line at a decent pace, then we're onto something.
Yeah, do some like uneven surface runs and all that stuff. Be really
ladders are key.
Oh, ladders for sure. Ladders. Definitely need more ladders. More ladders for
Probably
sure.
Ladders and 300s is what they should do.
Yeah, dude. Ton of 110s, ton of ladders, ton of 300s, all at once actually, and maybe like standing on a posted ball. All right, I'm gonna get myself in trouble. I'll see you guys. We'll talk. Have a good one.
See you guys.